to the Chamber Leadership Alliance and today's Chamber Leadership Development Program training.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Akriti Rana, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the program manager for the Chamber Leadership Alliance, and today I'd like to welcome you all to the Chamber Leadership Development Program on Strategic Planning and Business Plan Development. Today's topic is Unpacking Strategy and Planning. It is such an honor to have you here with us today. Now I'd like to welcome the President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Mr. Ron Busby. Ron, welcome.
Thank you for having me this morning, and thank all of you for joining in. This has been a wonderful ride thus far. Again, my name is Ron Busby, and I'm the President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., headquartered here in Washington, D.C., where we represent 145 Black chambers, located in 42 states with a membership base of over 332,000 Black-owned businesses. Founded on our 5 pillars, which you have heard me discuss quite often: advocacy, access to capital, contracting, entrepreneurial training, and the one that has really been at the forefront over the last few months, chamber development. We've had 3 wonderful pods thus far. The first one was on accessing capital and raising funds through grant writing, which all of our chamber leaders have all been interested in to make sure that they have the sustainability and the finances to continue to grow. Our second one was really for our chamber presidents and board of directors, which is really about leadership and chamber governance, which we all understand the importance of. And this one, especially during this period of time, is really about words that you've heard us all talk a lot about, which is pivoting and planning and processes. And so today we will have a great conversation about strategic planning and business plan development, which we all understand the importance of, to make sure that we're not just getting through difficult times, but we're planning ahead for the rebound and the reopening and the forward movement of our communities through our businesses and chambers. So welcome again. Make sure that you're taking notes, asking good questions, and we will be here as leaders to make sure that you have follow-up and continuing relationships. And with that, I'd like to thank Wells Fargo, as well as our other affiliate national partners from the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and the U.S. Pan-Asian Chamber. And I'd like to now turn it over to my good friend, Romero Cavasso at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber.
Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you, Ron, for the powerful work you and the U.S. Black Chamber is doing right now during these very uncertain times. It is a blessing, and I'm very grateful to be here with each of you. And I want to welcome all of our chamber leaders from around the country and say that on behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and our chairwoman, Carmen Castillo, an example of an American dream achieved, an immigrant-owned business owned by a woman who's created jobs and does a tremendous amount of work throughout this country and other nations, is a perfect example of the entrepreneurship of our collective communities. We represent 260 Hispanic chambers from Honolulu to Rhode Island, from Seattle all the way to Puerto Rico, and from South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley up to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We're proud to stand alongside our brothers and sisters from the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce, through the leadership of Susan Allen, through my other brother from the NGLCC, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, Justin Nelson, and of course, Ron Busby with the U.S. Black Chambers. It's very important that we have solidarity, and this training is provided to you at no cost through our friends at the Wells Fargo company and foundation. So for me, on behalf of our 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses and many of our members who are Hispanic business enterprises, and many of them Afro-Latino businesses, Asian, Hispanic businesses, and of course, gay and lesbian businesses, for us, Being Hispanic, we love to say, is a state of mind, and we have the largest economy and the strongest economy in the world. And right now we need to be here for each other and help each other out. So in conclusion, I want to welcome all of our chamber leaders from around the country that I just described, and say that it's an honor to be here, and it's our obligation to provide these services to you at this time. So with that said, it is now my pleasure, as Ron introduced me, it is my honor to introduce Ms. Susan Allen, the President and CEO of the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce, my dear friend. Thank you, Susan, and good morning to everyone.
Thank you very much, Ramiro. Here you are, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. I just saw an email from Frank Zhao, a member of our board of directors of our Northeast region, represented from New York and from Wells Fargo. Frank, thank you very much for the goodwill wish. And please hang around because you are in for a treat as well. This is management and strategic planning during a time of crisis, okay? I think some of them probably think that we are getting used to COVID-19. Yesterday at our live talk with all my colleagues here, I said, look, we're gonna look into COVID-19 in their face, in its eyes, and say, we're gonna beat you, we're gonna fight you. And we are. This strategic planning and the crisis is gonna fight COVID-19, and this is important. Nonprofit organizations like us are not immune to the type of impact that small businesses have suffered. We also have seen a decline in our revenue, decline in our activities. We all have to adjust our activities from our trade-in stock in-person meetings to virtual. Many people have been zoomed out. They don't want to do another webinar, but this one is very special. So you guys are in for a big treat. The U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce celebrate our 35th year, our Jade Jubilee this year. We're all ready to celebrate this big bash in June, yet COVID-19 put a big stop to our celebration. But we're not going to be deterred. We have been celebrating, and I'm so pleased that because of this Chamber Leadership Alliance, from the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce to the U.S. Black Chamber to the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, we have been able to get together and work. This is a place where all of us can find a level playing field, where we can find a way, a podium to express our individual talents and the uniqueness of our community. We will be able to overcome all the adversity that will face us. So relax, take notes, and you're in for a big treat. And I'll be here with you as well, and look forward to the Q&A at the end of this session. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Justin Nelson from the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. Justin, mic yours.
Hey, thanks, Susan. As Susan mentioned, I'm Justin Nelson. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am the co-founder and president at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. My colleagues, as you may remember, we did a name change a few years ago from National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce to National LGBT to be more inclusive of the communities that we represent, which is really what this body is doing here, what the Chamber Leadership Alliance is doing, is trying to be as inclusive as we can for chamber leaders from across the country. Very proud of this partnership and the work that we do together because of the diversity within our own diversity. We're very proud at NGLCC of the work we do around intersectionality, because in fact, the LGBT community is one of the most diverse communities there are. We have men and women, non-binary, every socioeconomic status, every geography. We are Hispanic, Black, Pan-Asian. If you take a slice of America, you have a slice of LGBT America. And so it's very humbling to be able to work with our colleagues at US PAC, US Hispanic Chamber, and the US Black Chambers, Inc. And to bring this programming to you, it's incredibly important, as all of you know, to be prepared in the planning process and preparing for the unexpected. I know that firsthand. In fact, we spent many, many hours working on days, weeks, working on our new 3-year strategic plan that we began implementing at the beginning of this year. Let me tell you, COVID-19 was not a part of the strategic plan. It has changed the way that we are implementing that plan, but there are still many facets of it that we have implemented or in the process of implementing or are rethinking because of this change and because of the challenge that's been laid out to us by COVID-19. So I encourage you to take notes, to listen, to learn, and understand that just because you are putting your plan together, it doesn't mean that every single line of every single page needs to be implemented exactly the way it's imagined. Obviously, there are things that come onto the radar that we hadn't thought of, things like COVID-19 and others that will impact the way that you implement and carry out your plan. The bottom line is we're here to help you. We care about your organizations and about the shared stakeholders that we all have in America's diverse small businesses that are the true economic engine of our economy. So it's my pleasure that today you are hearing from a real subject matter expert and a certified LGBTBE and Dr. Sarah Skidmore. You'll hear more about her in the introduction from Akriti. And with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Akriti. Rana, thank you all very much and have a great, great session.
Thank you for that, Justin. Thank you again to our incredible partners at Wells Fargo for their support of this program. Before I welcome our expert for the training today, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and all the CLDP presentations will be uploaded on the CLA website after the web series on strategic planning and business plan development ends on October 6th. We encourage you all to share the recordings and the presentation with your fellow chamber leadership. I would also like to remind you all to use the chat and Q&A function on Zoom for any questions that you may have. These questions will be answered during the session by our expert. Thank you all for those who filled out the pre-training survey for today's program. Please be sure to fill out the post-training survey as well, which you will all receive in your inbox. Lastly, we would like to welcome you all to the CLA Coffee Connection, which is an optional 30-minute networking event at the conclusion of the third training of this pod on October 6th. This networking event is designed for you to meet other chamber leaders and discuss what you have learned during this program. The link for registration will be shared in the chat box shortly. Now, I'd like to welcome our expert for the day, Dr. Sarah Skidmore. Dr. Sarah Skidmore is a leadership development consultant and innovation practitioner. Dr. Sarah's passion for the future of leadership, work, and learning drive the perspective she brings to leaders. Her inclusive leadership and strength-based approach impact her executive coaching and leadership consulting. Prior to being a leadership development consultant, she led marketing strategy for a variety of sectors, including small businesses, nonprofits, and global manufacturing. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Skidmore with us here today. Dr. Skidmore, welcome.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and get my presentation up. All right, so I think just about everybody will smile when they see a picture of a big fluffy dog. And I like to say that my dog, Clark Kent, the Labradoodle, is the co-founder in my consulting business. So just hope to put a smile on everyone's face to start this session. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. A bit more about my background is that I am a futurist. And so that really helps when it comes to strategy and business plan development, because when we think about work that futurists do through strategic foresight, it's really thinking 15, 20, 30 years into the future. And then envisioning that to develop the strategies and plans that we put in place today. So we'll get a little bit more into strategic foresight principles in our session 2. which is the following session after this. But I always like to share that I love being a futurist, and if anyone ever wants to chat about that offline, I love to be involved with that. So thank you for again for the introduction. I do like to share that I am a certified LGBT business enterprise, as Justin mentioned, and I love being part of the NGLCC, and I'm looking forward to today's session and the two that follow. So today, we're really going to be focusing on unpacking strategy and planning. So some of the learning objectives for today's session, you'll see here in green: to understand strategy as a leadership competency, to be cognizant of influences that impact strategy, and to recognize critical steps within strategy creation. And so that's going to be the focus of our session today. And then our session 2, which is coming up, we'll talk about some of the critical connections when it comes to strategy and planning. As I mentioned before, thinking about the future, thinking about innovation, and certainly inclusion as well. And then in our third session together, we're going to dive deep into some specific tools and methods that help leaders facilitate strategy and planning. So again, today we are going to basically have a crash course in strategy and planning from a theory perspective. So we sort of want to set the foundation and lay those foundational elements in play, and we'll build on that in the next 2 sessions. So I encourage you, as questions arise during the work in the session we have today, please go ahead and enter them in the chat. We'll certainly have an opportunity for Q&A at the end as well. But if you have a question that arises, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Sometimes if we wait to put our questions until the end, we may forget what our question is or whatnot. And as it's applicable, I'd love to sort of integrate some of those into the session as well. Now, this is a very packed session. We're going to talk about a lot of concepts related to strategy and planning. So, you know, as mentioned before, feel free to please take notes, but maybe keep in mind those 2 or 3 principles that are the top principles you're going to take away from the session. We know that all the leaders on the call are very busy and have a lot going on. So it's always important that what are those top 2 or 3 points or 2 or 3 perspectives that we're going to bring back to our work. And then, as I mentioned before, today we're going to really be talking about a lot of theoretical principles and sort of setting that foundation. And in session 2 and 3, we're going to get more concrete with specific tools and methods for application. So one of the things that I love about the group we have here today is the vast diversity that's represented. Everything from chamber size, chamber location, you know, whether you have an annual budget of $10,000 or an annual budget all the way over $1 million. There's going to be principles that we're going to walk through that you can scale for your organization. We have chambers on the call who have several staff members, and we have chambers on the call that maybe only have 1 or 2 staff members. Membership ranges as well. Some chambers are smaller membership than other chambers. Date founded, that's also something that is diverse and different. Scale, we have local chambers, regional chambers, statewide chambers, national chambers. You know, there's a big variety on the call. And that is awesome, and that is something that through the conversation we have, we're going to pull aside time to sort of talk about, well, how would you talk about this concept in a certain context versus a different context? So also, speaking to some of that diversity, we have some chambers on the call who have a 501c3 arm, and we have other chambers that just have the 501c6 aspect to them. Then I know the previous sessions you guys had was on leadership and governance. And so we have a variety of that represented as well, variety of different structures when it comes to advisory boards, when it comes to management teams, staffing structures, board of directors. All of these different aspects play into how a specific chamber may implement some of the strategies and principles we talk about. One of the really important aspects is knowing who the decision makers are for your chamber. So when we go through and we talk about strategy and planning and different methods and tools for undergoing these initiatives, it's really important that we know from the beginning who are the decision makers, the ones that need to participate in the program. Maybe it's the ones that need to provide that final approval. And again, depending on how your chamber is structured, it varies. It varies from a board, a task force, a committee, a subcommittee, membership decisions, staff decisions. So keep that in mind as we walk through this. What is your context? What is the context of your chamber? And how can these principles apply in your context? So for today's conversation, we're gonna follow this sort of three-chamber approach. So keep in mind, look at what we have here, Chamber A, Chamber B, Chamber C. Where does your chamber fit? If you had to think about, okay, where does my chamber fit in this? Do you align more with Chamber A, where you have a smaller membership? Maybe you have one staff person. Maybe you have a smaller annual budget. Chamber B, maybe you have a more mid-sized chamber. You maybe service regional capacities. Your membership may be over 200, 300 individuals. And then also Chamber C, maybe you have that over $1 million budget, you have a large membership, and you have several staff members. All of our contexts are different, but what we're gonna unpack is strategy and planning principles that can be helpful in any of these contexts, and we simply scale them to fit the specific needs of the chamber. So temperature check here. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm sure all of us have been in some setting where we've had to get our temperature taken. If you feel comfortable using technology, you can take out your cell phone and scan this QR code with your camera's phone. It'll take you to a quick survey, or we have the URL link here. This is something that you can come back after the presentation and fill out. It's not essential that you have to do it this moment. But in this survey, this sort of gives me an understanding of where are you at with your chamber. So one of the things that I aim to do in the next two sessions is integrate a couple of specific examples from our chambers present on the call. So think about, what is the biggest strength when it comes to strategy and planning for your chamber? On the flip side, think about, what is the biggest challenge? What is the biggest challenge in your context when it comes to strategy and planning? A lot of times spending time in reflection and identifying these things, it's pretty quick.
Does not support that feature.
Oh, sorry, my Alexa just went off. So these are often things we know. We like immediately, what's the biggest challenge? You know this information. What are you most interested in learning about? Is your chamber proactive? How would you rate the proactivity of your chamber? As well as, is your chamber more reactionary? In taking this moment to reflect on where you and your chamber are is really going to be helpful as we move forward in these policies. So just spend some time in that. So today we're going to cover three aspects. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership, how it's connected to strategy. We're going to talk about influences to strategy and planning. And then we're going to talk about the 3-step process of creating strategy. You can't get much more simple than 3 steps. So when we think about leadership, leadership is certainly something that has evolved and continues to evolve. So early research on sort of that evolution of leadership in the early 1900s, leadership was really synonymous with control and power. Who in our organizations had that power and control? It evolved over time to be leadership was attributed to individuals that had certain traits. It was trait-based. If you have XYZ traits, then you are by default a leader. Mid-century, it evolved into behaviors. Our leaders are those that exhibit certain behaviors. Several decades ago, we welcomed that evolution of leadership to be transactional to transformational. So moving towards that relational approach to leadership. And now in the past 2 or 3 decades or so, we see a variety of different leadership styles come about. Everything from strength-based leadership to adaptive leadership, to even some practice spiritual leadership, just depending on your context. And I really like that more inclusive approach to leadership that we've been uncovering and discovering the past several years. So how would you define leadership? You know, keep in mind your last sessions that you had was on leadership and governance. How would you define leadership? What does it mean to be a leader in your context? And this is essential to our strategy and planning efforts. This is that foundational component. So a definition that I like of leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. So it's really about influence and how are we using our influence to help the group around us achieve that shared goal and that shared vision. One of the biggest costs that we can see from Gallup research, and if you haven't read the book, it's The Manager. I definitely recommend you get a copy of it. It is filled with important principles for leaders in any context, including chambers. And so in that book, Gallup research through their studies has found that in the US alone, the estimated cost of poor management and lost productivity for non-engaged teams is almost $1 trillion, just below, just above $1 trillion. And it's even greater globally. So when we think about strategy and planning and the strategies we put in place for our chambers and the plans that we put in place for our chambers, we can see that it's critical that we are leaders who are encouraging engagement with those involved in creating the strategy. Again, we can see through same research from Gallup that engagement continues to grow, but there's still an opportunity for us to foster greater engagement. And the strategy development process and the business plan development process is a critical first step in growing that engagement, where we are including others into the process, where there is that shared vision and buy-in. And we'll go through some steps today on how to do that, how to foster engagement in this process of strategy. Again, some of these numbers may really speak to you. When we think about engagement, the differences in engaged teams versus disengaged teams, we can see higher productivity, higher profitability, lower absentee, higher ratings. This all corresponds to the work of our chambers, the work of the businesses our chambers represent. It's really critical. We see not just qualitative benefits of engagement, but quantitative benefits. Now, that sets the stage for how leadership and our understanding of leadership shapes the strategy and planning that we conduct in our chambers. And so let's dig into it. Let's go a little deeper now. What does this have to do with chamber leaders? What does strategy and planning have to do with chamber leaders? And when we look at the 6 roles that a leader plays within their context, we see that our leaders are to be forever learners, curious, inquisitive, people developers, encouraging the other members on our team are growing and developing in their professional capacities. A values guardian. We know that our leaders in our chambers are there to help support the values of the chamber and help support that shared vision and buy-in. Futures-minded innovators, right? Thinking about the strategy of the future, thinking about where do we want our chamber to be in 5 years? Where do we want our chamber to be in 10 years? Strategic thinker, which is going to dive into what our 3 sessions together are about. Okay, how do we bring that vision to life? How do we make that strategy? And then culture creator, how do we encourage inclusion and collaboration through the strategies that we create? So influences. These are, we're going to spend some time going through the five key influences of strategy. So if you are a note taker or you like to take screenshots, once we get through the 5 on this slide, I'd say that's a good screenshot worthy slide to have in your notes. So what are some of the influences that impact how we go about creating strategy and the strategy that we create? Organizational structure. Shared visions and values. And this will be a recurring theme in all of the work that we're doing today and in our future sessions, because we need all the decision makers, all the team members to have a shared understanding of where we're going and how we're getting there. People involved. Who is involved in making decisions at your chamber? Anticipated impacts. Or you could call this desired impact. What impact is your chamber wishing to have for the community you serve, the region you serve, the businesses you serve, as well as collaborative culture? How collaborative is the culture in your chamber? And if it needs to grow in collaboration, how can we help build that? So these are 5 important influences to the strategy and business plans that our chambers put together. So let's go through each one of these. Organizational structure. So as I started the session, we have a variety of chambers on the call. You know, the number of paid staff varies based on what your chamber is. The number of volunteers that you have with your chamber varies, and certainly the number of members varies. And this all is part of what your organizational structure is. So spend some time thinking about what is the organizational structure of your chamber. A lot of this initial work we do with strategy and planning is really about reflection and understanding where we are today. So here are 2 of the quotes I really like to speak to when we're talking about strategy, right? So strategy is the end, structure is the mean. And that is a great source. Organizational design, a step-by-step approach. It is a book. It has a lot of detail. If you really want to nerd out into strategy, I definitely recommend getting a copy of that book if you want a deeper dive. But think about that. So structure is the means of how we implement our strategy. Another quote we have here is, the structure of the organization is the way that the strategy is accomplished. And that is from Stronger People Leaders Workbook. So knowing your organization structure is fundamental to this process. So let's take a moment here. Depending on where your chamber fits, how might organizational structure influence and impact strategy? So if your chamber identifies in that chamber A area, where maybe you are a smaller chamber, when we think about organizational structure, it may be fairly simple. It may be fairly straightforward. It may be known, which is something that is actually not necessarily intuitive. If you are blatantly aware of what is the structure, we know the chart, we know who is where. And at this point, if you are a smaller chamber, you may, since you may have a smaller staff or just one staff person, you may rely on having a lot of member voice that is a part of your structure. If your chamber identifies in that sort of mid-range area, you've got additional layers, right? Additional layers of complexity. And in your structure also is something that map out. Make sure you know who are the important players at different points. And then if you fit within that chamber C, that larger scale chamber, your structure may not only be impacted by a larger number of staff who have voice or would like to have voice, your membership may also like to have greater voice. You may have some members that really have a vested interest, and there may be political layers of organizational structure. Think about classic office politics. There may be layers of that involved with how you influence and impact strategy with your structure. Next up, we have that shared visions and value. And so when we speak about this really impacts strategy, not only just the development, but the implementation of it. Do we have buy-in across the organization, across the chamber? Do we have buy-in across our staff, our members, our board members? Is there an appreciation for where we're going? Do you have everybody on board that's saying, yes, we want to achieve that vision, we want to achieve that strategy? Having this shared vision and a shared agreement on what the values of your chamber are within your context is critical, because when we start planning and developing strategy, that takes a finite amount of time. Living that strategy out, and as Justin mentioned in the introduction, making changes as things come into play, as real life situations come, iterations to that strategy, that's really when you need that buy-in and that support along the journey of implementing the strategy. So at the beginning, when you're creating the strategy, you definitely want to make sure that we have a shared appreciation and that motivation towards achieving. All of this shapes the thinking, the decisions, the behaviors. Making strategy, mapping out strategic success is another resource. For those who like to dig deeper, definitely recommend that as a resource for you. One of my favorite quotes from that resource is developing strategies with groups rather than on behalf of groups. And this is really important for chambers because when we think about the members who are part of our chambers, we want to make sure that we are including them in that strategy development process and creating the strategy, creating the business development plans. There's certainly different ways to integrate members into that process, but we just want to make sure that we're allowing for that voice and that they are participating in the process. We'll go through in session 2 and 3 some of the ways to do that. Some may say, well, our the leaders in our chamber, you know, really drive decision making. That's great. There's no issue with that. But there's ways that we can include our members along the way, so that they also have a shared vision and buy-in. Because it's not just our chamber leaders that we want to make sure have buy-in to that strategy and that plan, but also the members that we are supporting through the work of our chambers. So again, I bring back to this question, and we'll keep coming back to it again and again, is through this session, is where does your chamber identify? Smaller, mid-size, larger size? How might shared vision and buy-in impact the strategy that you implement with your team? So when we think about our chamber A, our smaller chambers, you may have fewer voices that are involved in the process, but that might require our chamber leaders to really facilitate and help cultivate that shared buy-in. Just because we have fewer voices does not necessarily mean the strategy development process is easier. Chamber B, our mid-sized chamber. Scaling. How do we scale, right? How do we not only bring awareness that a strategy is being created, but how do we build that shared buy-in across the organization? And then our large scale chambers, when we think about crafting that shared vision and encouraging that, there may be potentially a lot of voices vying for what the strategy should be. You may have members that want to navigate and be involved in that in different ways. How do we navigate staff-driven strategy in comparison to member-driven strategy? Is that something that your chamber is challenged with? Again, these are all prompts to help us think through how we go about strategy and planning. Let us spend time reflecting on our specific chamber, because as we move towards the tools and methods, we need to know where we're at today. Another influence when it comes to creating strategy and planning is the people involved. Again, we're talking about what are the different stakeholders. This may involve everything from members to board members to staff members, but it may involve outside groups. Look at our session here today. We have the perfect example of collaboration across different organizations coming together for a shared goal. So when you think about people involved, think about that. Who are other people that we may be able to include in our work? Communications. Communications is critical. How are we communicating with the people involved in our strategy development? What is the participation level that we are interested in having from those involved in the strategy process? Is it more of a passive awareness of, okay, just want to make sure that individuals are aware we have strategy? Or is it more of super active, very participatory involvement of, we want feedback on XYZ as we're creating process? Again, going back to that human capital engagement, what level of engagement are we looking for from those involved in the process? So let's reflect again on your specific chamber. What people are involved in the strategy process? Should there be additional people involved that maybe historically haven't been involved? Maybe there's some fine tuning of who needs to be involved. Maybe we need to tighten who's involved. So again, as I mentioned before, if you are in chamber A, maybe you're a smaller chamber, look for partnerships. When you're going to create strategy and business development, business plannings, there may be other organizations in your local context that may offer some really invaluable insights, and look for collaborative partnerships there. Though it may be, your chamber may be less complex than some larger chambers, you still have opportunity to encourage the participation levels that you're interested in, and think about ways to do that. Chamber B, this is where, these our mid-scale chambers, this is where we really are focused on scaling, in the sense that how are we scaling our communication systems so that we are including those that we would like to be included in the strategy process. Thinking about participation here, you may have individuals across any chamber. You may have individuals that this is their business. Strategy development may be their business. Facilitation may be their business. And how can you include those members in the processes that you're doing as a chamber? And then chamber C are larger chambers, where we have maybe the majority of people. We have a lot more people. How are we identifying which stakeholders and which individuals would be most effective in helping the chamber create that strategy and create that planning? And it's likely that you may have individuals in your own chamber, like I mentioned, who do this type of work and would love to be involved in that work you're doing. There may also be members of other chambers that are skilled in this. Maybe you don't have someone in your particular chamber, but reach out to the chambers that you are connected with and say, hey, do you have a resource? Do you have someone that may be interested in partnering with us? And there are ways to bring that about, but really understanding who is involved, the people involved. So when we think about engagement, it's important to think about different aspects. What does engagement actually mean? A lot of times we'll hear engagement, increase engagement, create engagement. Okay, what does it mean? How do we actually go about fostering engagement in our chambers? That includes everything from participation, right? Having, again, whether it's members, board members, committee members, whatever it is, having participation, having voice. Not just participation, but voice, and having opportunity for that. Having social support, where the team is supportive of other team members, and think of that cheerleader model where they're cheering on their team members and they are glad to be on the team together, working toward this shared vision. Comprehension of what we're doing, again, that shared understanding. Communication. Communication is something, whether it's through meetings, Zoom meetings, emails, text messages, whatever the method of communication is for your chamber, that folks are active in participating. And then relationships, right? Making sure that as leaders, we are fostering relationships across our team members and with other leaders in our organization. So I always like to offer this slide. So again, if you're one like myself who likes to screenshot, this would be a slide to screenshot or take down notes of. These are different areas of engagement. So when we say engagement, we're like, what does engagement mean? What is that? This is what we're talking about. Okay. Anticipated impact. So this is also one of the key influences of strategy development. And this, I am probably most partial to anticipated impact, because it really speaks to that foresight work, that futures work. What is the desired impact we want this strategy to have? What is that anticipated impact? If we implement this strategy, this 3-year plan, this 5-year plan, whatever it may be, at the end of it, what do we want to have achieved? What is it? What's the goal for our chamber? We're making a strategy, and 5 years from now, our chamber wants to be XYZ. What is that? Naming that. Because without knowing and without that shared alignment upon what our anticipated impact is, that's really gonna impact the effectiveness of the strategy and planning process. So spending time at the very beginning, understanding what do we want the impact to be. And over time, again, I keep referencing things Justin said at the beginning, but over time, as COVID comes up, right, not planned for, knowing how to optimize our strategy, knowing, okay, we've got to update this, we've got to make a new iteration. Strategy is living. That's definitely something that I believe and I help leaders facilitate, is the idea that a strategy is not something that you created at one point in time 3 years ago. It's something that, let's look at this quarterly. Let's see what we can make changes. How can we be more effective? What is our actual impact today? And is that the impact that we wanted to have? So here we go. I think this is the fourth book here. So for those who like to deep dive, we have Playing to Win, How Strategy Really Works. Again, a great resource. Choosing Where to Play is also about choosing where not to play. When we think about our anticipated impact, we can't do everything. We can't impact everything as a chamber. What is it that you do want to impact? What is it that you do have that shared vision for, that desire to influence positively in the future as a chamber? And do that, focus on doing that well. Again, knowing where to play is about also knowing where not to play. So let's be laser focused on our strategy, right? And this is going to influence our strategy. If we're able to stay focused on what we would like our anticipated impact to be, we're going to have to put blinders on and stay focused and say, hey, this is our strategy. This is what we're moving towards. We can't do 100 things, right? But we can do a few things well. So again, let's do a reflection. You'll see I'm very a big advocate of reflection of, okay, anticipated impact. Your chamber, right? Think about it. And this is something that can be done in a group setting. It's not just, for necessarily one individual to do, but think, what is the anticipated impact of, if you are wanting to craft a strategy, wanting to craft a business plan, where do you want to go? Okay. And so that is something that is true across all chambers. I don't have a special note for anyone, because any of the chamber models we have here, because it's true of every chamber. You got to know what your desired impact is. Though it may scale differently based on the size of your chamber, you still got to know that. One thing I will say is when we think about impacts, how are we going to measure that impact? And that's important in the strategy process of, if your goal of the chamber is XYZ, how will you know when you've gotten there? And having some type of measurement tool to do that. It does not have to be quantitative, right? It doesn't have to be a financial number to hit. It could be, but it does not have to be for your chamber. It could be qualitative. It could be something about, building awareness or building partnerships or whatever your specific chamber wants, but you need to have a way of, how do we know we've gotten there? That goes back to the anticipated impact. Collaborative culture. Okay, so we have an iceberg here, if you will. This is, if you've studied culture at all, I'm sure you have seen the iceberg analogy. But when we think specifically about collaborative cultures, how are we allowing space for diversity within our chamber, within our team? How are we acknowledging the voice of team members? How are we celebrating the work of the team, right? This is a step that teams often miss. And this is so important, especially to our chambers where we have membership driven models, is how are we celebrating the work? You know, we have so many small businesses that our chambers work with, and how are within your chamber decisions and strategies, right? How are you celebrating the work that you're doing as a chamber leadership? Maybe celebrating the work that your task teams do, that your committees do. This is essential and critical to collaboration. And then also, how are we holding teams accountable? You know, if in our strategy, we had the goal of XYZ by Q2, what levels of accountability are there? And that varies. It varies based on if your chamber is staff driven or if your chamber is volunteer based. So if you have more of a staff driven model, you have different types of accountability available to you than our volunteer based chambers have available to them. So again, reflect on your chamber. Would you describe your chamber as having a collaborative culture when it comes to leadership decisions, strategy decisions? The answer does not have to be yes, right? The answer can say, well, we need to become more collaborative. Whatever the authentic answer is the right answer, right? Like, we want to authentically reflect on where we are today so that we can put strategies and plans in place that gets us to that anticipated future. So how do we operate and make decisions? Again, how do we foster collaboration? And this is definitely, as I mentioned, going to look different in a staff-driven model than a volunteer-driven model. And that's okay. It's just knowing where your chamber's at and how to best use the resources you have available as you're making strategies. So our next step here, the critical steps of strategy creation. Now, I try to keep this as simple as possible. There's only 3 steps: development, implementation, and optimization. Certainly we can go deep into any of these, and there's, you know, 10 or 20 step processes depending on what tools you use. But in its most simple form, strategy creation is about development, implementation, and optimization. So development, when it comes to development, this common theme. And so, you know, as I started the webinar, I said, hey, write down 2 or 3 points that you're going to bring with you. And I hope that a shared buy-in, shared understanding, shared vision, I hope that's one of the themes, right? Because when we focus on development, this shared understanding. So again, thinking about your context, who is on the team that is making the decisions for your chamber? It's going to vary based on the chamber. Are we in a shared understanding of the direction we're going? Does everyone on the team have a shared understanding of our chamber is headed here? Alignment. Is there alignment that exists across the team? And then commitment. Is there commitment? Those team members who are on the team to help make the decision, to make that collective strategy, is there commitment? And again, the answer, we're not looking for everyone to say, you know, yes, everyone's committed, everyone's aligned, everyone's moving towards the shared direction. We're looking for everyone to say, hey, this is where we're at, this is where our chamber's at. And we have commitment by some players and maybe not by others. We're aligned towards this, but not towards this. We're mostly in the right direction. These are, again, that temperature check of where are we at. And then we want to work towards, right, everyone being in the same direction, everyone having alignment, everyone having that commitment. So we have some best practices here that as we're sort of crafting this shared understanding, allowing time for divergence, where we have team members able to express what is important to them or what they are feeling or what they are thinking is critical. But then after that, we need to have convergence where we're coming together about thank you for voicing all of these things, and we are in agreement that we are moving in a certain direction. And that's critical for this collective strategy for chambers. So one of the processes for framing the strategy creation process is a 4-step model of going and gathering the information. So that speaks to having folks on the team be able to voice what it is that they would like to voice, as well as doing research, right? And then defining the challenge and situation, analyzing the opportunities, and then reframing a challenge or situation towards a positive. So when we come and when we analyze situations, there may be real challenges, right? Like right now, our chambers have the real challenge of handling COVID-19, handling the pandemic. That's not necessarily an opportunity at the start. We may have to reframe it so that we can find opportunities for our chambers. And that's really where we're at with strategy creation, is it's understanding, okay, what is the challenge or situation, and how can we reframe it so that our chamber can develop strategy for success. So again, if you are a screenshot type of person, go ahead and grab this. And I do see notes. These slides will be available after the sessions are completed, but if you just are a note taker and want to capture those screenshots, feel free to do so. So here's a learning process. And again, today I'm just giving principles, some theories. These are not steps that you have to memorize, but they are steps that are helpful as we're sort of shaping, okay, how do we go about unpacking strategy? How do we go about creating a strategy? And as we move towards some methods and considerations in session 2 and 3, this is sort of part of the baseline we have here. So learning process, again, assessing where we are. Again, that's why we're taking all these moments to just pause and reflect on, okay, today my chamber is at this spot, okay? Understanding, taking time to know where we're at today. Then again, understanding who we are and where we want to go. Back to that influence we talked about in the previous section of what's the anticipated impact, what's the desired impact. Learning how to get there. So this is where we're starting to cultivate the strategy, right? A lot of times when it comes with strategy, we don't have people in the room that have all the answers, right? We have people in the room that are willing, dedicated, committed, aligned towards a certain direction. And we do the work, that research, building those relationships to put in place the strategy to get there. Making the journey. Again, that goes back to why we want to have that shared commitment with others on our team, because the journey of implementing strategy is the majority of the work. Creating the strategy is not the majority of the work. The majority of it is implementing the strategy with the team. Checking our process and then reassessing where we are. So think about this process. We're going to pause here again. Think about your chamber. Where are you at in this process? We may have folks on the call who are trying to figure out where their chamber is, still assessing. We may have folks on the call that have already created a strategy and are living into it. They're part of that journey, right? There's always opportunity to check where you're at. To take an iterative approach of, okay, let's pause. Are we going the right direction? Is this where we're supposed to be going? And assessing where you are. So today we have chambers on the call, all affected by the pandemic, just like just about every other organization right now with this global pandemic. We probably have businesses that are part of your chambers that are struggling. And that is likely impacting your chamber in some capacity. It is possible that your chamber may have membership renewals down. You may have members who have been a part of your chamber for years and their business has completely vanished and they're unable to make their membership renewal dues. Your chamber may have relied on in-person meetings and events and networking, and now that may not be possible. For the past several months, of course not, but as different organizations slowly move back into in-person settings, and I'm not endorsing or not endorsing that, just making the observation that there may be opportunities for your chamber to leverage digital events. Maybe you've been doing that. Maybe you've been doing it and it hasn't been effective. Or maybe your chamber's been doing it and it's been quite effective. Wherever your chamber is at, knowing where we are today. Okay, so let's look here. If you fit within chamber 1 or chamber A, so you're a smaller chamber, maybe with a smaller budget, fewer members, and we're looking at this learning process, assessing where we are. Okay, how can we do that? There's opportunity for online surveys. There may be opportunity, again, if you are a smaller chamber, to have socially distanced gatherings, depending on the regulations of your local authorities. There may be opportunities to partner, as mentioned before, with other organizations in your local community to come together through virtual gatherings or whatnot, of understanding the impact that you're seeing right now. Again, our mid-sized chambers may have a larger number of membership, as with our large chambers. So you may be able to do greater number of opportunities. Maybe it's Zoom gatherings or Zoom focus groups, maybe having a series of those to capture member feedback. There may be opportunity for, again, if you have businesses in your chamber who do this type of work to help your chamber. Again, this could be part of their member experience. If you have organizations in your chamber that maybe have been very financially impacted by the pandemic, there may be in-kind services that they could offer your chamber in replace of financial dues. So it's just assessing where we are, learning where we are, thinking about where we are. Then when it comes to understanding where we want to go and who we are, again, we have opportunity for visioning across any chamber size. We have an opportunity for that. Again, member surveys, economic reports, industry reports, foresight work, right? So this work of where we are today, where do we want to go? Where do we want our chamber to be in 20 years? What do we want our chamber to be known for in 20 years? This is really distant thinking. And this is really helpful for us as we're trying to put in place strategy, because if we know our ultimate goal of where we want to go, that will help us put together plans for today. Okay, and then looking here, the next step we have is learning. So learning is contextual. So how you go about doing that in your specific chamber, whether it's through sessions like this, and encouraging your folks to participate in sessions like this, and whether it's just on other types of learning opportunities there are, really encouraging that with your chamber in a contextually appropriate way. Learning goes back not just to knowledge, but learning speaks to attitude. Are we having an inquisitive attitude, a curious attitude? Hey, where might we be in 5 years? Where might we want to go in 5 years? Learning of opportunities there, and then putting together the strategy for that. So this is just a timeline graphic. Again, so when we think about strategy, we're definitely in the 3 to 5 year range When we think about visioning, that's a bit more long-term. What's our vision? What do we want to embody? Putting the strategy in place to become that vision. And then when we think about that foresight, that futurist work, that really, you know, imaginative work, that's really talking about the systematic evolution. And chambers have such a great opportunity because we have such a cross-section of organizations involved to think, where do we want our community to be in 20 years? Where do we want our region to be in 20 years? And being a part of that conversation. So the second step in strategy creation we have here is implementation. So again, we have a couple of elements of implementation to keep in mind, not for you to necessarily memorize all of the elements, but just to be aware and think of, okay, what's important for our chamber? So we have focus. How's the team staying focused on the strategy? We have project pacing. When it comes to strategy and planning, it's not as simple as knowing what the vision we're going. What are those milestones? What are those measuring points? How do we know if our project's on pace or not? How do we know if we're behind? How do we know if we're ahead? Specified objectives. Again, going back to clear, knowing what are the clear objectives, what is the anticipated impact, knowing this beforehand. And then timeline. What's the timeline for fulfilling this? And these are all important elements that as we go through session 2 and 3, we'll make sure that these are included in different points so that our chambers are able to have well-developed plans and well-developed strategy. And then thirdly, that third process in the strategy creation is optimization. So again, going back to your chamber likely had strategies in place that did not account for COVID. That's okay, right? It's a global pandemic that took us all, but how are we optimizing our strategy? So it's been 7 months now in the US, so it's how are we along the way? How can we shift the strategy? How can we change the strategy so it's contextually relevant and we're still able to move towards that shared future? Applied minds, how engineers think. I think this is the 5th or 6th resource recommending here. Anyone can claim to optimize something in words, but in practice, it's a different story, right? And so when we're thinking about on that journey of implementing strategy, when we're 1, 2, or 3 years into living the strategy, how along the way have we actually held ourselves accountable to making those optimizations, realizing what's working, what's not working, and tweaking? So 3 steps here, again, a screenshot worthy slide, but of course the presentation will be made available in the future as well, but focusing on development, implementation, and optimization. So in today's session, we spent time connecting leadership to strategy. We spent time digging into 5 of the influences that impact how we develop strategy and planning. And then we walked through the strategy creation process, the simple 3 steps of development, implementation, and optimization. So we have 2 more sessions together, and I encourage you again, if you are able to, with your phone, scan this QR code, and I have a short survey here. And if you are able to do that, or simply email me as well, a challenge or 2 from your chamber, I will try to implement specific questions from different chambers into some of the examples that we go over in the next 2 sessions. So today I sort of use that small, medium, large scale chamber, but I would love to use a specific challenge from a chamber. So feel free to either scan that QR code or send me an email. I know we are running up on the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we have opportunity for Q&A. So let me go ahead here and hand it back over. So let me do that now. Okay, is there anything else I need to click, or is it back to you?
I think we're good to go. Thank you, Dr. Skidmore, for that amazing and very insightful training. I'd like to thank everyone, all our participants here, for your participation and questions. Also, it's just wonderful to see, your support for our program, for our training, and for our institutions. Please do not forget to register for the CLA Coffee Connection on October 6th, for October 6th. Again, like I mentioned, it is a 30-minute optional networking event, and we have designed the networking event where you can meet other chamber leaders as well as discuss what you've learned during this training session. Again, it's on October 6th, and the link to registration has been shared on the chat box. And again, we look forward to seeing you in our next training by Dr. Skidmore. And it's going to be, the topic for the training is going to be on critical connection to strategy and planning. And it's on October 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Please visit chamberleadershipalliance.org to register for our upcoming training program for this pod. Again, thank you all so much for your time and participation today, and we will see you all on Tuesday, September 22nd. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.